this episode of Kings of Napa, it's pretty much an all-out war against Bridgette. However, when it comes to August and thinking that she has all these allies, she may be thinking that a little bit too soon, since a lot of people's intentions may not match hers, so their loyalties are definitely circumstantial. To start off, the first topic deals with the aftermath of what happened in the last episode, and from what we learned, the reason that Melanie started to convulse wasn't just her hitting her head, but also because she has what is known as the African sleeping disease, which is an actual thing, but it's mostly something you get in rural Africa, so it's not something that's common. But to make a long story short, she got bit by some type of fly, a testy fly I think it's called, and with that, she got an infection that is now entered her brain, and thus she's now in a coma for her own safety. Now, all that's happening in the last episode led to Christian coming back, Yvette coming back, and it's also causing a bit of a generational rift. Vanessa, with, healing her relationship with Melanie, now is very kumbaya, let's pray for her, trying to keep peace, and Yvette is also on that, but on a different kind of energy. While Vanessa is definitely trying to be more calm about it, Yvette's very much about King's people don't do jail, we need to get her out. But the problem with that is that there's so many reasons for the kids to want her to be in prison or else pay for what she did that unfortunately she doesn't get a lot of allies when it comes to this idea. For when it comes to Dana, he's still not over his wife leaving him possibly for her, or else the idea that maybe she's gone full on anti-men at this point. Or at least anti-men in terms of she doesn't want to be with a man. And then when it comes to August and Christian, both of them have issue with the fact that one of the things that Bridgette did while she was working with Sean and Sean is reveal the whole dessert wine idea. And with that, now Sean and Sean, are having a dessert wine come out, and it pretty much throws them both for a loop. For Christian, it's just a kind of betrayal that is so ridiculous for him that he and Dana feel the need to run up on Sean and Sean and not just present a cease and desist, but kind of give like a very little bit of a threat. One that, of course, with everything that's going on with Sean and Sean, maybe not the best idea, since they already have one family member there again, so imagine it being Sean and Sean versus the King's family wines. Possibly a season 2 storyline, but who knows. But getting back to the point, Christian and Dana roll up on them. August is kind of freaking out because this was going to be what saves the company, which makes her legacy. But unfortunately now, she doesn't have something that sets her family's wines apart. In the second topic, we're going to bring Bridgette into this. And one of the first things that Bridgette is kind of thinking about beyond her mom is just, why is she in prison? She starts off talking with Aunt Yvette, who promises to get her help. And something that Bridgette requests is August coming to see her. Now, this isn't necessarily the best idea, mainly because when it comes to August and Bridgette, apparently there's been a little bit of a rivalry that we didn't know about. For all the talk of sister and all that, apparently there's also been this issue of who can get and maintain Reggie's attention. And so when those two are talking, that plays in the background as August presenting all the reasons why she doesn't trust Bridgette. Whether it's the whole thing that Christian found with the plant stuff, whether it's the phone calls, whether it's the keeping the secret of knowing that Reggie is her dad. All of this is what she presents as issues, and Bridgette tries to break it down in terms of why she could be associated with that. Because right now, as Kelvin said, a lot of it is circumstantial evidence. So, in terms of the poison, she notes that when she worked at Sean and Sean, and even when she works with Kings of Napa, that's to control the vine growth. So it's not something that she did in terms of wanting to kill the vine. Somebody possibly used that against her in order to do damage by overdoing it. And considering, let's be frank, how Christian is kind of a dummy when it comes to that type of stuff, who's to say that Sean and Sean's former person didn't do that when they got fired and got replaced by Bridgette. I mean, racism isn't really talked about too much in this show. I mean, blackness is definitely part of their brand because, as Yvette says, only 5% of venues are owned by black people. But whether or not somebody of Sean and Sean's former employment did something, again, hard to say because we're not really giving a lot of people to point fingers at. But getting back on track, Bridgette explains when it comes to that poison, it's not her. She uses very little bit to control the vines, and then when it comes to the whole situation of the phone calls, she says maybe someone spoofed her phone in order to make it look like she's guilty. And then when it comes to the Reggie thing, she goes through a story in which she reminds August she's been looking for her father information about it for her whole life. And when she heard Melanie and Reginald talk about her college in a way that sounded like two parents, she decided to get a DNA test, and that's how she found out. And she kept it to herself because, well, I mean, look at all the damage it did when it came out after Reggie died. Imagine all the drama if he was still alive. But even with saying all that, it's not really enough for August because once she mentions the whole dessert wine thing, there's no real coming back from that. And so, they start to become like Melanie and Vanessa, and their back and forth leads to them being at an impasse. But of course, what doesn't help this situation is that Kelvin gets involved, and with Kelvin getting Bridgette bail, that means now there's a bit of a divide between Kelvin and August because Bridgette is essentially the person that is going to bring down the company. For we learn that Jason's company, OP, they have decided to drop Kings of Napa wines, and now they're going to take up Sean and Sean's wine because it's better for their profits. So, unfortunately for August, now she's really like on the defense, on the ropes, with no clear sign of how she's going to make a comeback. And in case you're wondering regarding Yvette and Jason, what that means for their relationship now that he's no longer in business with the Kings, well, from what we're told, Yvette's going to still see him. I mean, it's not clear why, because he says a lot of stuff that makes him sound sus, especially in terms of things that make it sound like he drinks the Kool-Aid a little bit too much, but it seems Yvette enjoys his company, and with that, she decides, you know what, we're not working together. Yes, she may say this is not some assalamu alaikum type of situation, which, let's be real, it possibly is, but it seems that she's going to rock that boat until it no longer is able to float. So the final topic is just what's going to happen from here on and possibly carry over into the season finale next week. Right now, when it comes to Bridgette's case, it can go one of two ways. Right now, DA Loggins is offering a plea deal in which Bridgette would get 6 months in prison. She'll have 5 months of probation and then would have a restitution fee of $500,000. As we've seen in the last few months, Bridgette has either not been employed or has iffy employment when it came to Sean and Sean, so $500,000 is really not an option. So she rejects that whole idea, especially because she still claims innocence. But the alternative is 8 counts of felonies. But the alternative is 8 counts of felonies and 20 years in jail. So, despite her situation not looking good whatsoever, she decides, after dropping Kelvin when he presents his plea deal and then picking him back up, that she's going to go to trial. With that, it continues to mess with August because she knows that Dana and the rest of them aren't necessarily on her side as much as they are against Bridgette. So Kelvin also being not fully on her side, but rather helping her enemy, it's making things worse for her. And she already had one moment when it came to potential wine critics of, kind of being frazzled. So adding Kelvin helping Bridgette and then Sonia making it seem like because the ink isn't dry that there's still maybe something going on between her and Kelvin, it's too much for her. Too much drama, and while she doesn't have a dramatic end this episode, it does seem that things are not getting better anytime soon for her, and her becoming president maybe not have been the best idea. But not to be outdone, while she does have Kelvin on her side, she also tries to see this man named McConnell, who apparently is the guy who she called a few episodes back. But it's not clear what their relationship was, but it definitely seems like it might be at this end because he has no desire to do any more business with her. He wants to be fully separated from things because it's getting a little too hot for him. The first highlight is just the return of Anavet, and that's because how can you not enjoy Anavet? Her being extra, her being just so outside of what you would think the Kings of Napa would have in characters, it's definitely something that shakes things up and kind of brings a constant refresh to the show. It makes you pay attention because while everybody else is prim proper, praise and all that, then you have Anavet who shows that she's still definitely from Oakland and hasn't assimilated into what it means to be from Napa. And I would even say overall, that's why I'm losing my voice. One of the things we really enjoy about her is that she's just not all talk like in terms of, hoping for the best. What Anavet does is give actionable items for how you can better things, and if she has to, she'll put in the work herself. And starting off with Christian, one of the main things that we appreciate when it comes to Christian this episode is that he showed not only personality, he showed part of his personal life and also presented, what he has desires for in the future. When it comes to him and Dana bonding and, coming together in order to kind of bulk up in front of Sean and Sean, that was a beautiful scene that showed that when it all comes down to it, Christian does present himself as one of the representatives of the King's family brand. And with Dana holding him back, you can see that they want to show Christian as one of the strong characters, somebody who's about that life, and remind you that while he does enjoy Balsianaga and all that type of stuff, his family is still very much from Oakland, and they will get down if they need to. But aside from the whole Sean situation, I'll also admit that when it comes to him and Sheila, I'm appreciating that relationship more, mainly because Sheila's presented as somebody who's not trying to be a gold digger, but definitely wants to invest in Christian. Whether it's trying to love him in a way that is beneficial for both of them, or even as a viewer reminding you that the business that he was supposed to go in is bourbon, and that she is one of his main supporters since, as shown in the past, Dane is not too high up on it. August is about her dessert wine, and Vanessa, I don't think she even takes into account what her son's trying to do with their alcohol business. And speaking of Vanessa, another highlight for me was just, even though Christian's not the type of character who could at all compete with Anavet, with him saying that this is what a stroke looks like when Vanessa was being nice to everybody, that to me was hilarious. Now, switching over to August, I think what we most liked about August in this episode is just the depiction of anxiety and a reminder of how mental illness, when it comes to this family, is not something that's really talked about or confronted. For with her, as you see her try to deal with the whole Sean and Sean situation, you can see her, I would say it turns what could just be seen as the usual soap opera style drama and makes it so that you can more so see it as her having a breakdown. The kind which can eventually lead up to a full anxiety attack, like we saw during the presentation when it was people telling her that Sean and Sean was doing a different wine. And it makes it so the drama seems a little bit more real, a little bit more authentic, and not just for the sake of getting people to talk on social media. And I would even throw in, when it comes to August's relationship with Kelvin, it got a slight boost this episode, and that's mainly because the two wasn't trying to be lovey-dovey, but instead were kind of button heads. Because when they try to make them as this cute little high school couple that are now together as adults, it seems very forced, if not corny. But those two kind of having a volatile relationship because of Bridgette, now it brings in a lot when it comes to August's insecurities, potentially with dating, since we don't know who she might have seen outside of Kelvin. And then when it comes to Kelvin, it really sets him up to be an individual rather than August's high school boyfriend who's come back into her life. The next highlight is just seeing that there are changes that are coming about because of what was revealed after the last episode. Speaking specifically, and maybe only about Vanessa, one of the things that you can see is definitely happens that with the air being cleared with Melanie, she's now starting to open up, trying to be more of the person who maybe she would have been if Melanie didn't abandon her, if perhaps Sandra wasn't the parent she was, and it really shows you how much trauma can stunt a person and who they are. Yet, at the same time, while things are peaceful with Melanie, you can definitely see when it comes to Dana, she hasn't forgotten all the things Dana said in an effort to make her mad when it comes to her and Melanie's fight and him adding on to it. So when she decides to snap on him and say that that's why Rose left your ass, well, not in specific words, but that's how it's kind of interpreted in my memories, you can see that she can't do a 180-degree turn all in one night or all within a week. There's still that, malicious, petty person that the Pierce family, is in their genes. But she's making an effort. She's trying. It's just, while this family is willing to forgive, I would never, ever say that this family is the type that would ever forget. The final highlight is the fact that when it comes to the blackmailer storyline, it's getting the kind of boost where you can see it more as an asset than a liability on this show, if not something that is just unnecessary. Now, since the beginning, the blackmailer storyline has been getting minimal development in order to eventually present itself as we see it this episode. For Bridgette, it's been one of those things where we've been getting little hints of why she can be the blackmailer, and everything adding up to pretty much circumstantial evidence as is noted this episode. Yet, with her meeting with McConnell and a little secretive conversation from before, there's a reason to still think maybe she could be lying. And then when you add in that hidden money, it further makes you question how much of this is circumstantial and how much of it is just plain old factual evidence. Yet, when you bring in Grossbeck, who's the waiter that often waits on Bridgette and August when they go out, there is a need to question maybe his family could be involved, because every now and then this show does touch upon race and how things were so difficult for Reggie when he first got there. So who was to say that Grossbeck's family, upset about this black family moving in and doing so well, decided to use their little gossip network to blackmail the family and get a cut of what's making them be so successful. And I would even say, outside of the whole blackmail and who could be the blackmailer situation, there's also what happens with Kelvin. Kelvin really needed to redeem himself after being such a crappy lawyer for Melanie, because his whole deal with Melanie getting her money, getting Bridgette her job back, August reneged and made him look like an idiot. So when it comes to Bridgette in this new situation, him getting her bail, how he talks with the DA, it really boosts him career-wise. And then in terms of the personal side, setting aside that he may or may not be cheating on August with Sonia, or else the complications, which is getting divorced, I would say it kind of further helps you understand why he had to get away from this family. With Aunt Yvette coming in, pretty much guilting him into helping Bridgette, you see what he was trying to avoid in the first place, and that is the idea that he owes his family anything. And I would add in that him going away off to Harvard on the East Coast while they're over in the West Coast of Napa Valley was also about him having the option to leave and taking that option the first chance he got, potentially just like Melanie left Vanessa and all that family drama the first chance she got. Because again, this show is very much about patterns and people often doing what's best for them, and as we've seen with both Vanessa and Melanie, coming back when it's kind of a crisis situation. But I really do think at this point with Kelvin, He knew what the family drama was as a teenager. He's seen it again as an adult. So the chances of him really sticking around, especially with the divorce drama and then having a kid, I think it's more so a familiarity thing than it is something that's possibly good for him. But like August, he has to live and learn, and unfortunately make mistakes that, yes, will probably leave him with baggage, but at the same time, as long as the baggage doesn't get cumbersome, he'll live. The only on the fence topic is just feeling like Dana took a hit so everybody else could get boosted. For while we have to love and appreciate what happened with August, Kelvin, and Christian this episode, unfortunately it seemed that with Dana, he didn't take like a full step back in terms of who his character is, like in a negative way, but I do think he kind of got put on the sidelines with us just seeing him, half naked, abs out, and then having a parade of masseuse come in and out of a room. Which, by the way, I'm trying to figure out why was he doing that on company property and not like in his own private room or whatever. But I guess, Dave is very much about his ego and him showing that he's still attractive, his prowess or whatever, by having these women parade in and out of public spaces. That's supposed to boost him up. However, as shown, Christian knows something's wrong with this, so that's why he calls Rose. And overall, I'm just hoping that when it comes to the finale, that we shouldn't see this as a disinvestment in Dana, but more so just kind of setting up that, like most of the family, he isn't really good at speaking. He isn't really good that he isn't really good at talking about his emotions, and this is just another showing of how, when it comes to the King's family, they rather divert your attention from what's going on rather than have you truly confront them and stay on them in order to eventually push out what needs to be said. Overall, one of the things we're kind of worried about right now is that the Kings of Napa is not even breaking 300,000 views per episode, at least from what we're seeing from Wikipedia's sources. And that's one of the lowest figures we've seen when it comes to an own scripted series. With Love Is that got canceled, when it comes to the end of Greenleaf from recent episodes of Queen Sugar, they were all usually much higher than this, even sometimes over a million. So all I can hope is that with the developments we see in this episode, it isn't too little too late, since the show seems to really have found its rhythm for nearly all of its characters at this point.